the linguistic symbol of an almighty God. The idea of an almighty implies that everything that actually happens is already the will of the Almighty. Traditionally, we speak of a single source, like a trunk, from which many developments arise. Many branches come from that same trunk. Many creations come from that same creative source, that single creativity, that single creator, the Almighty Creator. All creatures, all creations arise from that. Every action of any creature is part of creation. If there's only one Almighty Creator, then everything that happens is already the will of God. God's not opposed to anything. All of the things that God could be opposed to are God's creations. God's not opposed to fun or to seriousness, nor to anything else. No contrast, light or dark, or let's say quiet and loud, or bright and dull, cold and warm. There's nothing that is outside of God's influence, God's creation. The almighty creativity doesn't have any conflict with some other creativity. God creates all, including the devil and the experience of hell and so on. Every word, every language, all of these are creations of God. So an almighty power would be like a trunk of a tree from which all other powers branch. There would be no conflicting power to an almighty power. There's no devil that's going to threaten to overthrow the almighty power of God. There would be no power beyond it or outside of the boundary of the category of all power, as in all-powerful. It's inclusive. Almighty, all-powerful. That means there's nothing outside of it. That's the linguistic category we're talking about. An almighty, all-powerful, all-inclusive creativity or creator that produces every single form, every single development, every single creature, every single moment, every single perception, every single label of perception. Everything is created by the single source. That's the idea of God. It's the same idea as nature or the universe. We could use other extremely inclusive ideas, or other extremely inclusive words. So that's the idea of an almighty God. Yet, a devil may say, sure, God's almighty, but in accord only with what I say and what I think. God is almighty in general, but not in the specific matter of my personal salvation, in my life. In my own case, I obviously know better than God. I know how to identify what to be proud of and what to be ashamed of. I know the way to get to salvation eventually, someday, maybe. I'm very confident that I know exactly how to get to salvation eventually, someday, maybe. I mean, I haven't done it yet, but I have a good excuse. I can tell you who I blame for that. And on the devil can go, casting accusations and blame and denying the authority of God, or denying the creativity of God, denying that God is the author of all things. So that last statement about eventually getting to salvation, that may presume many things that could be false, like that salvation is not available immediately, and that it takes time to earn. But what if salvation can be called a result of prior actions as well as a way of being? There's a way of using the term salvation that refers to something that's the result of a sequence of prior actions. But there's also a way of using the term salvation to refer to something that is immediately available, kind of like people use the term faith or grace. You don't have to do something to qualify for grace. Grace means that nothing is nothing additional is ever required. It's instantly available by grace. There's no actions required. There's no sequence of events. There's no one's approval that needs to be extended and documented. You don't have to get license in order to have the experience of salvation. So, what if salvation itself is eternal, but it can take time to recognize salvation? The recognizing of salvation, it could be what takes time, what has a chronology of, well, I got the idea that it's possible for me to recognize salvation, and then I went through the process. I started to get some sense of it. I started to read some stories. I started to expose myself to some parables. I started to have some initial experiences that I think could be it. I started to talk to more people, and eventually, over time, the recognition of what this word salvation means could develop over time. But that doesn't mean that salvation isn't already present. It's kind of like chemistry. Over time, I study chemistry, but that doesn't mean chemistry didn't exist until I understood it. It was happening all along. Over time, I learned a little bit about it. I learned there's something called chemistry. I learned some things about it. As time goes on, I learned more about it, maybe. And that recognition process can take time. But chemistry itself is eternal. What if chemistry is eternal, but the recognizing of chemistry takes time? What if salvation itself is eternal, but it can take time to recognize salvation? The perception or recognition of salvation may arise at a particular time, like for a particular person, perhaps as a result of a specific process or ritual sequence, like a sequence of words or motions or any other kind of ritual. But that's just the perception of something. Chemistry, salvation, whatever it may be. What if the thing perceived is in fact eternal? What if it was available for people for thousands of years to experience it and perceive it? But an individual organism may experience it only after a certain process of coming to recognize this term. I mean, if someone doesn't know the English language, then most of what I'm saying probably wouldn't be very useful because they wouldn't have any familiarity with any of these words, including salvation. So they couldn't make sense of what I'm saying about salvation if they couldn't make sense of all the other stuff I'm saying. That doesn't mean that the English language isn't real and isn't clear, but somebody who doesn't speak English